Okay, yeah. So,
Oh, goodness.
Okay, I do not know how I'm supposed to remember all those details.
We'll see how this goes.
Okay, so
Story time.
I'm so alone!
Hey everybody, today we're doing a game called Virtual Telephone where I'm going to read a story and I'll pass this along to the next person in line and they have to watch over the video and they can only watch over it once, they can't practice and they are going to have to record themselves repeating the story. If they can do it, great, but what's likely going to happen is the story will change over time, and when they pass that along to someone else, it'll morph more and more, and we'll see what we get at the end. So, here is the story. Alright. In a kingdom far, far away, there was once a beautiful river, cool and soothing to the swans that lived within it. Many of these swans were golden. They had golden feathers all over their bodies. And the swans spent most of their time on the banks of the river, hanging out, chatting with one another, and playing games. And every 6 months or so, the swans would leave a golden feather by the river so that the king's men, the knights, could come and collect the swans' fee for living in the king's river. Now, after the soldiers would come and collect the golden feather, they would deposit the gold into the king's treasury. However, one day, a homeless bird saw the river. And the bird had nowhere to stay, and this bird was scraggly and was sick and needed some food and needed some comfort. And when the bird saw the river, it thought to itself, "Oh wow, the water looks so cool and soothing to my feathers. I would love to make my home there." But as the bird settled down and swooped down into the river and glided to a stop, the swans came over shouting at the bird, "This river belongs to us. We pay a golden feather to the king to use this river. You are not allowed to live here." The bird replied to the swans, "Brothers, sisters, I am homeless as well. I need a place to stay. I will pay rent. Please give me shelter," this bird cried out. "How will you pay the rent?" the swans asked. "You do not have any golden feathers like we do." The swans began to laugh at the bird. And they further added, "Stop dreaming. You're never going to live here. Please leave." And this humble bird pleaded many times, but these arrogant swans drove the bird away. So the bird went to the king, went to the big castle inside of the king's courts, the beautiful statues and gems, and the majesty of the court was amazing to this bird. And this bird went to the king and said, "O mighty king, the swans that live in your cool and soothing river are impolite and unkind, and they did not care for me when I needed a place to stay. I begged for shelter, but they told me they had purchased the river from you and used golden feathers to pay its rent." And the king was very angry because he felt that the swans are insulting the king indirectly by basically making the king feel like he depended on the swans to pay rent, when in reality that was but a pleasantry for the king. And so he sent his soldiers to kick the swans out of the river, but also to drag them before him in his courts. And the king said to the swans once they arrived in the court, "Do you think the royal treasury depends on your golden feathers? You cannot decide who lives by the river. The river belongs to me. Leave at once, or you will be cooked for dinner." The swans shivered with fear upon hearing what the king had said, and they flew away, never to return. And the humble little bird built his home in the cool and soothing river, and allowed any other homeless bird to come and live there as well. They lived forever in peace, and gave thanks to the king.
Alright, well, I just finished watching Alex's video here, and we'll see how this goes. I think there's a bit of allegory going on there. I like that, but, alright, there was once a great kingdom that was on the side of this river, and the river was very beautiful. It was cool and flowing, and there were swans that lived there. They were magical swans. I don't think so. They were swans that they lived in this river, and they played, and they had fun, and they grew golden feathers. And once every 6 months, they would go up onto the bank and drop one of their golden feathers for the king of the kingdom. And the soldiers would come and collect the feathers, and they'd go and pay rent. And with that rent, they were allowed to live in the river in peace. One day, a poor bird came flying along, and it was homeless. It didn't have a place to stay. It was all scraggly and rough and desperate, and it saw this river as it was flying along and thought, oh, that seems like a place to stay where I can recover and rest and eat and be nourished and healthy. And so it decided that, yeah, I'll land there and I'll rest and enjoy myself. And so it flew down and landed by the river, and as it was enjoying itself, the swan saw it, and they came over and said, "Hey, you can't be in our river. This is ours. We pay rent to the king for this river." And so the poor bird said, "Oh, like I'm sorry, I need a place to be. I can pay rent." And they scoffed at it and said, "How can you pay rent? You don't even have golden feathers to give the king. That's why we get to be here." And so this bird, it got kicked out by the swans. The swans chased it off. And so the bird went into the king's castle, and it was this castle full of gems and statues. It was really ornate, and the bird went before the king and sought his counsel and said, "Oh, great king, I was looking for a place to rest, and I came to your lovely river. However, the swans there kicked me out, saying that I couldn't pay rent, and I'm looking for mercy." And so with that, the king got angry with the swans, and he ordered the guards to come pick up the swans and kick them out of the lake or the river and drag them before the king. And so they brought him before the king, and the king yelled at them and said, "Why have you decided that this bird could not stay in my river? Do you think it's because of your gold that I let you stay, that I'm dependent on you?" He says, "Those things are a mere pleasantry for me. And if you do not leave, I'll cook you for dinner." And so the swans were fearful, and they said, "Oh, forgive us." And I forget how the story ends. I think they got to all live happily together, or the swans got kicked out. We'll go with the happily together. I'm sorry. Okay. On to you, Erica.
Okay, I do not know how I'm supposed to remember all those details, but here we go. So, there once was a kingdom, and beside the kingdom was a river. And in the river were these special swans. I think Logan said they had fun. These swans had fun in the river, okay? These swans had golden feathers, and with these feathers, they shed them, and people, I don't know if the people collected the feathers or the swans, whatever. Somehow these golden feathers equaled the swans paying their rent to live in this river. And then one day, oh sorry, Charlie says hi everyone. One day the swans had a scraggly swan or some kind of scraggly bird come along and wanted to hang out in the river. And the golden swan said, no, you can't. You're homeless, blah, 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 whatever they said. And then they said, you have to be able to pay rent. We pay rent to the king to live in this river. And so then the homeless swan was like, I can pay rent. And they scoffed at him. And so then he went to the king, the homeless swan, and said, "Oh, king, have mercy on me. Please let me pay my way to live in the river with the other swans." And the king, this took him by surprise, and the king said, "Well, you can live there. What did these golden swans say?" And he said, "They said I'm not allowed to live there." And the king said, "No. You think I need their gold? You think I need them to pay rent? No, it's simply a pleasure for me." And then happily ever after lived all the swans. I don't know, or maybe Logan said that all the swans were kicked out. I'm not sure, but hopefully I did not kill it.
Oh goodness. So once upon a time there was a river somewhere, and there were swans in it, and they were like special swans, and these special swans had golden feathers that they used to pay rent somehow. And one time there was a homeless swan with ruffled feathers, and the homeless swan, was told not to be in the river. And, so he was told not to be in the river, but then he went to some king and was all like, "Hey, they told me I can't live in the river." And the king was all like, "What? I don't need your golden feathers for you to live in the river. You can live in the river." And they all lived happily ever after and had fun. Yeah. I probably completely messed that up, but good luck.
Okay, yeah. So there was a bunch of swans, and they were told to go live down by the river. And in amongst these swans was one swan that had golden feathers. They were beautiful. They were like the king of the castles of the river. And at one point there was this one swan that just wasn't like the rest. He had golden feathers, and he wasn't allowed to stay in the river. So in the river, the other swans had told him to leave. So the golden swan went to the king, and the king said, "No, you're allowed to live in the river, because I said so. Make it so." So the golden swan went back and lived in the river, happily ever after.
Story time. Once upon a time, there was a bunch of swans that lived in a river. But one swan was different, because he had golden feathers. And because he had golden feathers, all the other swans were like, yo, you can't live here. And he was like, what? And then he went to the king, because they were in a kingdom, and the king said, no, you're allowed to live in the river because I said so. And so the swan with the golden feathers went back to the river and was like, yo, I'm living here. And so they all lived happily ever after.
Okay, so a long time ago, there was a swan, and it had golden feathers, and it lived in a river, and there was a whole bunch of other swans, but they didn't have golden feathers like this one swan, and so I think he felt alone, and I think the other swan said that he couldn't live there, so this swan with the golden feathers went to go see the king of the swans, and the king of the swans said, yes, of course you can live there. So that swan with the golden feathers went back to the river and said, look, I get to live here. And then they swam around.